during the civil rights era, there were songs sung, and this reminds me. It reminds me, in the song on freedom, I'm reminded. I'm reminded because it was an era that some of us will not forget. And before we bring Muriel up, we have quotes, and I've asked Liesl, Laura, and Tom to read. Liesl?
Amy's going to take Lisa's place today.
Okay. Thank you.
Slavery is the curse of curses, the robbery of robberies, and the crime of crimes. Cazenovia, Fugitive Slave Law Convention, August 21st to 22nd, 1850. Sorry. The world is a muddy place, and if good men don't try to clean it up, bad men will make it a swamp. James A. Michener, Texas. 3. Compassion is the basis of morality. Arthur Schopenhauer, note, and by extrapolation, morality is the basis of ethics. M. Tillinghast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Spirituals emerged from the midnight of slavery, a little light in the sunless existence of that harsh hell life that we as Blacks endured when hope was only an idea. Muriel Tillinghast. Number 5, it does not require a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen to set brush fires in people's minds. Samuel Adams, and hopefully that's us.
Thank you.
Our founding ideals of liberty and equality were false when they were written. Black Americans fought to make them true. Without this struggle, America would have no democracy at all. Nicole Hannah-Jones. Moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. It is the one essential, vital quality for those who seek to change a world that yields most painfully task, something missing there. That yields a most painful task, perhaps. Robert Kennedy Sr.
Thank you for emphasizing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Just before Muriel come up, we'd just like to say, Muriel has been a member of this society for a number of years, and she has brought in so many people to talk with us about different topics that would just be enlightening to our brains and making us aware of things that we need to be aware of. And also, she's been active. She's an activist. She's introduced us to some things we didn't, some of us didn't, I won't say everyone, didn't know about. And today's talk will enlighten you very much. It's about activism during the 60s with SNCC, and I give you Muriel Tillinghast.
Thank you, I'm fine. Thank you. In the fall of 1959, I was 17 years old and a freshman in college. I had just returned from South America. I was eager and a bit confused about how the world went, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Allow me to share a bit of my background. I came from a family of activists. We read and talked knowledgeably, casually, but especially at dinner. Routinely, people sought out my family for advice. Everyone in my family went to college, so I was to be no exception, hence Howard University. Any observer could see that some people in my community needed assistance. A number of returning soldiers of both races, for example, gathered in alcohol-addled bands on various street corners and in alleys, far removed from their families' abilities to understand or to help them. My grandmother was active in many organizations, taking me to meeting after meeting. I had no choice but to go with her and sit and listen and learn. When my church had a work camp focusing in part on the southwest section of Washington, D.C., I got an unvarnished look at urban poverty. So you could see that I was fairly well schooled about the, quote, human condition, end quote, early on. I just didn't know it yet. In the summer of 1959, before entering the university, I was a participant in a work camp in British Guyana. Some of the work was in small towns, and some of it was in the bush. The experience was an eye-opener on many things, including empire, colonialism, and decolonialism, each with its own demands and issues. What could have been explained to me about America in America became clearer looking at Guyana. So as a freshman, I had a working knowledge of several societies and their social construction. I was looking at answers, however, in mind. This was an underlying quest, though unknown to me at the time then, readying me for the movement and the Mississippi Summer Project several years removed. One fall day, a friend of mine asked me to go with her to a meeting. Reluctantly, I went. Vividly, I remember that day because that is the day I was introduced to the movement. I came into a meeting off campus where there were wall-to-wall students, most of whom were white, and almost all from local universities. Organizational leadership was clearly with the Howard students, and Stokely Carmichael, also known as Kwame Ture, was giving out assignments. He was one of the recognized leaders of the organization. At Howard, Stokely and others had started the Nonviolent Action Group, NAG. Before classes and work, before eating and sleeping on our 24-hour work schedule, we were engaged in various public outcries against all manner of racial discrimination. Youth are full of energy and questions, and with the right direction can do many positive and resourceful things. NAG, with its endless efforts, was just the right fit for me. Shaking the knowledge tree to learn how we got this way gave us the impetus to read, discuss, and expose root causes. We were not an ignorant, unschooled lot like our adversaries, who were simply white thugs. Assuming rational thought could prevail, we held to the tradition of argument based on nonviolent principles. Still, our work made some people upset. Systemic practices become fundamental, and fundamental thinking, particularly that of racism, guarantees structured patterns of oppression and victimization, much of which is written into law. This is endemic in American history. This is key to understanding what is called critical race theory, CRT, but that is not our charge today. Having this understanding, however, led us to recognize that changing laws was required, and those changes needed to move swiftly after effectively challenging certain behaviors and their practice. The ability to change laws required access to the vote in the meanwhile. Weekly, some of us worked with Gloria Richardson in Cambridge, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore. Generally, NAG worked up and down Route 40, challenging public accommodations for Black people. Route 40 existed before the Federal Highway 95 was built. It was a public humiliation that on this principal highway between Washington, D.C. and New York City, diplomats of color could find no relief or service. And we kept up our demonstrations for jobs and against discriminatory practices within the district. We were orderly and well organized with signs and spokespeople, with handouts telling our message. Our sidewalk demonstrations were small. On a good day, our pickets numbered about 20 to 30 people. Our meager forces were buttressed by Jim Former's Congress of Racial Equality Corps, with whom we actively worked. While we worked on one side of the sidewalk, there would be plenty of people walking on the other side, many crossing the streets staring. Well, the movement has to start somewhere, and with everyone, there is a beginning. We knew that we were just part of a historic continuum. Sometimes we sang to keep our spirits up. The songs came from churches, unions, and other organizations' history. Over time, with the ebb and flow of student life, the following organizations were present to a greater or lesser degree: CORE, the International Conference of Christians and Jews, the Dorothy Day Catholic Workers, Young People's Socialist League, the National Student Association, and assorted friendlies without any known affiliation. The winter of 1960 was busy, hot with activity. Students in Nashville, Tennessee were being trained in nonviolent tactics and testing their efforts locally. There were sit-ins to test eating and the use of public facilities serving interstate commerce. It was testing public accommodations. Diane Nash and John Lewis were stalwarts of that effort. NAG sent some volunteers. My friend Stanley Wise had a front tooth knocked out by angry whites who were our age. They were violently assaulted us while police stood by uninvolved. Please note, I know of no case where whites were arrested in any of our demonstrations. In every case of which I am aware, the police arrested only the victims. Interesting. On Monday, February 1, 1960, 4 young men from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical University, North Carolina A&T, staged a sit-in in Greensboro. In relatively short order, 200 students joined up in their efforts. Then the idea jumped across the South into 30 communities in 7 states, and before the month's end, there were thousands of students who would join this activity. A call went out for student activists to come to Shaw University for a conference on the Easter weekend. Ella Baker, a regional worker of the NAACP and a co-founder with Martin Luther King of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, made the call. The purpose was for students to come together and develop their own set of strategies for how they were going to change the American socioeconomic construct. As a result, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, was developed. The flint rock of action sparked a fire that was to shape the student movement. The spirit and the motivation was American. Black students in their actions were joined by allied whites. People from all walks of life, all colors, and the spectrum of American economic life came together in a defining way. Until SNCC, some communities had calcified and ossified a 100-year-plus old post-Civil War set of policies and practices. It was time for them to be jettisoned, thrown away. America needed a new day. We were cautiously optimistic. Resistance was strong, unrelenting, and ugly. The movement had its dangers. Before I leave NAG's work, let me mention the 2 men who occupied our office were white Appalachians who came to the district to lobby on behalf of the victims of Black lung, the bane then and now of coal miners. On a particular day in the spring of 1960, a call came to our office and I took it. The call came from Bill Moore, a white postal worker from Baltimore. We had probably bumped into each other in our work along Route 40. We had talked for a good while. We talked about the dangers of his journey to Mississippi. He was traveling alone and saying goodbye to his movement friends in the North before heading south. I wasn't surprised to learn that he did not live to deliver to deliver his letter to Ross Barnett, then the governor of Mississippi. He was martyred. I was not in the first wave of students in SNCC. Nonetheless, the mutual efforts between NAG and SNCC were active. NAG did as much as it could to muster for our Southern brothers and sisters. For me, NAG's frame of reference was desegregating various places, including Glen Echo Amusement Park. It kept me busy. SNCC moved ahead with its own organizational trajectory. I met most SNCC staff after I went south in 1964. Under Jim Foreman, John Lewis, Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, the early operations were set up in a central office in Atlanta at 10.5 Raymond Street. Later, moving to 360 Nelson Street, the latter a warehouse large enough to hold all of the administrative operations that were developing. NAG was doing its thing in Washington, Gloria was doing her thing in Cambridge, and we were all struggling with small volunteer staff and limited resources, but we had a whole lot of enthusiasm. When I heard about Sunflower and LaFleur counties, two infamous Mississippi Delta counties, as memory serves me, this was the late fall of 1962. I didn't know much about SNCC's work as I was preoccupied by my own work, as I've already mentioned. That notwithstanding, Bob Moses, among other staff, were continuing their voter registration work in Mississippi without much outside help and facing absolutely fierce local white resistance, replete with bombings, shootings, and murder. Excuse me. Then another shoe dropped. To stop Black people from trying to register to vote, Bob had joined with local Mississippi leaders to generate Black registered voters. Welfare, known as commodities in the state, were cut off in the counties mentioned. Now, this is a state where upwards of 80% of the Black population lived below the poverty line. Cutting off commodities meant wholesale starvation. This was a step number 2 in a 2-step process to drive Black Mississippians out of the state. The first step was to encourage the mechanization of cotton farms, even when it was not in the interest of the farmers, given the expense involved. The removal of Blacks from the traditional hand labor used in cotton plantation economy was to squeeze their already crippled circumstances to a halt. To bring local circumstances into sharper relief, I will read the following on LaFleur County. For Blacks, segregation, exploitation, and abuse permeate every aspect of life. Though almost 2/3 of the county is Black, 131 of the county's 168 hospital beds were reserved for whites only. More than 80% of the Blacks lived in dwellings rated substandard, but their tar paper shacks with a single light bulb would charge more for electricity than whites in their modern homes. In LaFleur County, almost 100% of the whites were registered to vote, compared with just 268 Blacks, which is 2% of the population. In the 7 years since the Brown decision, only 40 Blacks had been allowed to register compared to 1,664 whites. With Blacks in a 2-to-1 majority, whites knew that Black voter registration threatened their economic and political control. One white voter told a reporter, "We killed 2-month-old Indian babies to take this country, and now they want us to give this away to them?" Clearly, help was needed, and it could only come from people like us. So we went to work and organized a massive food drive of non-perishables. We were able to stock a tractor trailer, but then who was going to get this to the people who needed it? Ivanhoe Donaldson was bringing in a truckload from Detroit, and there were others, all young and committed people, doing the same. Folks in the Delta were counting on us. This was the impetus. I knocked on every door on 16th Street from U Street North. Either there was no answer or the answer was no, accompanied by a look of annoyance. However, when I reached All Souls Unitarian Church, they said, you could store the food here until you could move it out. Moving the food was one thing, but getting it to the intended people was another. There had been reports back to us that various food trucks had been robbed at gunpoint on the Mississippi roads. Well, I said, we'll see about that. After all my efforts, I wasn't having it. Did I mention that we had no money? With enough energy, we thought nothing was too hard or too difficult to overcome. With enough energy and thought, we were convinced that we could move most things forward. So again, I started knocking on doors. And again, a long story short, I wound up at the headquarters office of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. After laying out our needs, I found a friend and a mission, and our mission was ultimately accomplished. I will always be grateful to them for their help. Excuse me. NAG had begun to work like a machine. When people took on responsibility, they were expected to follow through without excuse. That is a principle I carry with me today. Learn from the mistakes of others and follow through. These are key to various successes in readying for the big one. While we were working in DC, SNCC was setting up various projects from Danville, Virginia, dotting various communities down through the Deep South, wherever a request for a project could be matched with existing resources. Consequently, SNCC field secretaries, as staff was called, worked alone, cooperating with local community people. It was rough going for everyone. Work centered on voter registration and desegregation, and there were other interests as well. Multiple daily contact was made just to keep tabs on the staff's well-being and to see where they were. When we were not working, staff people kept a low profile, as low as possible. These were two measures to help ensure safety, but there were no guarantees. Without question, and in a constant response to this work, the white community was openly hostile and generally violent. The violence tended to be police initiated, but as often as not, it was white youth's fiendish and unchecked behaviors that filled the newspapers across America. In this period, there was a great deal of churning in the social fabric. There were not only college and university-related supports for the movement, the war in Vietnam was becoming less secret. You will remember it was a secret war. It was becoming less secret as young Black men were being drafted in large numbers to fight it. With the growth of personal politics, Black people often voiced their resentment to a foreign war in which they had no stake. The fighting communism rhetoric was completely unconvincing. In 1963, SNCC started planning what would be known as the Mississippi Summer Project of 1964. Bob Moses and others had lobbied hard within the organization to focus on Mississippi for several reasons. First, it would be 4 years since the initiation of work, and a broad level of support, not to mention national attention, would help to move things along, embarrass the state, and move Mississippi from its self-imposed news isolationism. Second, as the bellwether of Southern sentiment, if Mississippi could be modified, projects in other places might have the benefit of that moderation. Admittedly, this was a far shot, but worth it. Third, expecting a large number of applicants from white students and utilizing them in the field, the Klan and kindred organizations might function less viciously. Again, another far shot. And fourth, white mamas and papas were not going to sit idly by and watch their children being slaughtered, period. They would raise holy hell. They would mount campaigns for accountability in newspapers, on radio, and on TV, in journalistic areas that were known to downplay events, especially those affecting Black people and their issues. And fifth, the pressure that white parents would bring would possibly unlock the slow to non-existent federal watchdogs, primarily the Justice Department, to do their job. and protect citizens to the full extent of the law, something that racism of American justice had yet to do for Blacks. They would raise hell. And if you don't get it, in movement shorthand, the white skin of youth supporting and doing our work was purported as a shield to modify the behaviors of other whites and have them defer, modify, or cease attacking us. 3 days after graduating from Howard, I was packing my suitcase in the middle of the hallway in my house. Actually, I was packing books for the Freedom School I was slated to teach. Outside of the books, I don't think I had anything else in my 2-ton bag. My mother and I had a conversation. She could see that I was hell-bent on going, so she didn't object. She had taught in Mississippi with her then husband, who taught at West College in Holly Springs. She had nothing good to say about Mississippi. It was dangerous and poor. A day or so later, I got on the bus, this time with a lighter and more intelligent array of things, and headed to Oxford, Ohio. We were to receive a week of orientation before heading in. After that week, our group of largely white volunteers plus SNCC staff were as ready as could be expected. Having established some basic survival skills and some camaraderie, we were essentially ready to go south. We went in a caravan of buses. Amid the laughter and talking and singing that almost always accompanies young people, we were keenly aware that not all of us would make it back home, and some of us didn't. While we were in Ohio at training, I remember a phone call came in that indicated a ditch awaited us. I don't remember if Philadelphia, Mississippi was identified. At another time, another call indicated a church burning in Philadelphia, Mississippi, Neshoba County. White Mississippi reaction was coming in hard and fast. Clearly, things were going to get ugly quickly. Now out of session, Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman were moving around, gathering their things and thinking, but clearly preparing to leave, to drive to Philadelphia, Mississippi to see what they could do. The church was one that had been used for their work. I just saw them in a flash. Again, as I remember, they were moving fast and in a huddle with James Foreman and Bob Moses. I saw them in a flash and then they were gone. Before we left Oxford a few days later, those three had disappeared. On June 21, Lawrence Rainey Sheriff and Cecil Ray Price, his deputy, who actually fingered the men while traveling, recognized the Kofo car and spread the word among his fellow classmen that he had eyes on the three. The Kofo car was a dead giveaway, it was known. On absolutely false charges, the men were arrested and released in the night. We all knew what that meant. Hadn't we finished training on this tactic? Although we didn't say it, we knew that they were not going to be found alive. Excuse me. This is a situation over which we had absolutely no control. Bob Moses had said, Mississippi needs no exaggeration. It was already an exaggeration. Heavy is the weight of recognition that change costs, that victims and change agents pay in ways that can never be repaid. But the movement stubbornly stayed. On my bus, as we approached the Mississippi state line, the bus went silent. No one said a word. It was eerie. Our fear was palpable, and so was our determination. Thank you. Mississippi was a state like no other. At the time, it was outstanding in the extreme negative of all standard indexes measuring public well-being. It ranked at the bottom of everything. 50th in poverty and first in hate. Its hate was marshaled by the police, preached by its ministers, and held tight-fistedly by its robust vigilantism. This was a police state. I got off my bus in Greenville, a small town on the Mississippi River, known, for being among the calmer places. related to race. In River County, Greenville was about an hour from Greenwood, a town with its own infamy, and Money, Mississippi, where Emmett Till was murdered. It was totally segregated, and the black side of town was where my office was, on the second floor. It took me about a week or so to leave the space and venture into the street to see what I could see. It was a normal day, I suppose. I made it through that day and the days that moved forward. I was introduced by some people who hung around the office, and the former director left, and I was now the project director. We didn't know each other well, but the ball was in my court, so to speak. After the discussion and figuring out what was expected, I set the work out, assigned work areas, and tried to comply with multiple gentle mandates from the Jackson Office of COFO, the Council of Federated Organizations, the state's headquartered operations, and Atlanta, Georgia, where SNCC was headquartered. The workday started in the dark and it ended in the dark. Many homes had poor lighting, so we moved our activities with the sun. Community meetings were held at night where people got off from work, but nighttime was particularly dangerous in dangerous Mississippi. It would not be unusual for cars driven by whites to be outside of the church doors with their high beams on in a show of intimidation, or along the road looking to see who came to the meeting. When I tell you that the people were brave, I mean they were brave. No two words about it. Our day started early before dawn when people were heading to the fields for their daily work. The people I spoke to were cotton workers, the poorest of the poor. Our timing to talk to them was between 4 and 5 a.m., before things got complicated. That is, before white folks started to arrive in middle to find out who we were and what we were saying to their workers. Getting people to consider registering to vote was a big step. Actually, talking to us was a big step. The South, particularly in the towns and villages, everybody knew everybody, and we were new. Black people figured that we must be the freedom fighters coming to help them get the vote. We were different looking, wearing different clothes, didn't talk with a Southern twang, and we're talking about the vote. Some of the people were interested and some weren't. Wholesale, whites saw us as an invasionary force coming to take over to disturb their way of life. They were not willing to give us a chance. There were few secrets in a small Southern town, and all of us were marked as Northern agitators. Being the one functioning office where people could at least go and tell someone some of their troubles, if ever such a place existed, all kinds of issues walked through our door. Many had to do with voter registration. Significant numbers dealt with brutality, the vigilante kind, and the particulars of poverty. We tried to make some of these impossibles possible, because that is what you do in the movement. You try to make things better. You do it because there are few alternatives. This is some of what I saw. A poorhouse, maybe a bit less dreary than the 19th century kind, but dreary nonetheless. I secretly prayed that I would never have to live that kind of experience in my later life. I was told stories of gangs of whites jumping on and brutalizing their victims. I saw cops extort patrons at gunpoint in a juke joint for no reason. I saw contracts signed by the uninitiated for their talents to be the exclusive property of this and so corporation from which they would never again hear from them. Their talent effectively shelved. Silencing the particular competition of talent was a trick active then. Most Black people had sporadic schooling. Yes, the lack of schooling in a literate society guarantees a permanent underclass. And from my knowledge of the imprisoned, crime is only one of the few viable choices to the undereducated. Mississippi's education was a state system operated locally at the county level. County politics ruled. Schooling for Black children stopped when the cotton needed to be planted, again when it needed to be hoed, lastly when it needed to be harvested and baled. 800,000 bales came through Greenwood in a year. Little wonder that in some of the starkly rural settings, Black children only got a snippet of the education that was fully intended that they should have. But why should a Black child get an education when all it does is make them uppity and get the wrong ideas and have to be put back in their place, thinking that they were free? Lest one think that Mississippi Black people were a postal sign for a totally deficient model, unapologetically due to the conditions foisted on them, let me indicate that materially, yes, Mississippi was onerous in that regard. However, there were a number of positives that I witnessed. First, I want to acknowledge the beauty of the people, their features, their movements, as they went about their work or chores. In their simplicity, they were a pleasure to have known. Their humility and kindness was far beyond movies. That people went out of their way to protect us, listening, warning us, driving us around because otherwise we were walking, introducing us family by family to those who could be trusted and those who were possibly interested, putting themselves and their families at risk. This verve was the background and the backbone of our community organization. Their generosity, how even the poorest among the poor managed to find some meager portion of food to share. I am reminded of a story in which a woman, a poor widow, gave a wise man 2 pence in a contribution to his cause. When some observers upbraided her because of her paltry amount, the wise man said, "The rich give from their profit, but she gave all that she had." Such was the gift of Mississippi Blacks, who gave it to us and to the world. Once, when I was walking down the street on a Sunday morning, I heard the most beautiful voice in song. Liltingly, it was so clear, its tonality so striking, it was magical. It held me spellbound. Literally, I stopped in the street to listen. I also saw wonderful families, most of whom had multiple children, and the ones that I knew were strong and well-adjusted, parents and children. Just good people. And I guess I got spoiled because I expected goodness in other people when the opportunity arose after I left the South, but I looked in vain. But that's another story. Good white Mississippians never came across my path. I'm sure there were some, but I didn't meet any. I moved around the state when I could. Initially, we were looking for our brothers who had disappeared. Yes, we were scared, but we were looking anyway. Later, SNCC had 1 or 2 conferences in Waveland, down near the coast, where the grass was green and there was no cotton. I could get crawfish and some beer and chill under the bough of a beautiful tree without the sense of the hateful history of trees and Black people in the state. I could coax someone sometimes to drive me to New Orleans, where the general atmosphere was just different. Yes, it was Southern, but for me, it was less stultifying. Seafood hoagies was how I celebrated my vacation away from the job. That's about as far as my $9.64 per week would take me in 1964. It was a pittance, but I was glad to have it. Time will not let me continue. There's much more I could say. I have shared some of the joys and struggles of my work in SNCC. Each of us who did the work has his or her story, and I thank you for giving me this time to tell you some of mine. Some of you will ask, well, what about Martin Luther King? You didn't say anything about him. In my constellation of men and women in the movement, Martin takes his place alongside many, as first among many, all who gave and gave, determined to get this country to live up to its greatest aspirations. America, a place where for once in human history there is plenty for all, greed is king. Consistently, some interest in change is replaced by no interest. And then, when possible, change comes begrudgingly. But our forces renew in each generation, forging plans for a new and better day. Young and old are opening books and learning the history that some would have us forget. They are learning what they never knew before. Among the histories is the No SNCC, a small group, strong, of the American blend, young, some older, highly educated and lowly, Teachers and farmers joined in the mission to make America not what she was yesterday, but what she can be tomorrow. And so the struggle continues, a luta continua. Thank you. Oh, thank you. What do you want to do?
We have a little time for Q&A. And just before we do that, I'd just like to mention, I didn't introduce Muriel with all of her qualifications because I had seen the talk from when she was at New York Ethical, and I knew who she was. Of course, I knew before. And I knew that she would be able to let you see who she is. And a part of who she is right here at Ethical Culture is the chairperson at Lucy's Children. And she can explain thank you, Lucy's Children to you at a later time. I just want to give you an idea of what Lucy's Children do. Muriel had folks to come in during our COVID to talk to us about, I can't call the name of it right now, a doctor to come in to talk to us, just like she went down to wherever she went in Mississippi to be of help. She is great help here at Ethical Culture, and she collected gloves. She collected money to ship these gloves to people who needed these gloves. And a part of what I did to help people had to do, this is at Ethical Culture, and I'm just mentioning this. Vondra helped me to deliver coats to this activity is on pause right now, but those of us here at Ethical Culture, I'd just like, if this is your first time, come back, because we do some wonderful work here. So please come back, and we're open right now for Q&A.
Is this Q&A?
Yes.
You're invited to ask me questions or make comments.
Hi, thank you so much for just everything you shared today and for the resolve that you have had in your work throughout your life. It's incredible to hear about it. I know that the song that we sang together at the beginning, that it had originated as a hymn, but that it had kind of crossed over into a movement song with a SNCC organized high school walkout that I don't remember exactly where it was. And I'm curious if you can speak to, or if you could speak to your experience with using music as a spiritual and an organizing tool with your work.
Well, a cappella was our tool because very rarely was there an instrument that was available to us. And I will tell you, music was personally inspiring. Sometimes we would be humming it to ourselves, and sometimes people would break out into a song. When we had a meeting and things got like really bogged because we were dealing with some really serious stuff, somebody would break into a song and that would just break that hiatus at that particular time. Our songs came from such a variety of places. Union songs, you went to church this morning, they didn't tell you, but you went to church with some of these songs that the brothers were singing this morning. And I will tell you, in Mississippi, almost nobody had these little towns, nobody had an organ or a piano or anything like that, and somebody would just start, and other people would just come in. Words were means of encouragement, which is one of the reasons why when I listen to the songs that, I guess you'd say post-90s, and I listen to words that they were just thrown into the air. Our words told stories, our words gave support and hopefully strength to people. People who were in jail, sometimes, when our people were jailed, the white kids would be jailed, but the white folks, good luck with that one. And the black ones would be with black people, and people would start singing between the cells to sort of let you know there's communication, you're not alone. I know, and now this is sort of a segue, a friend of mine, Cynthia, who is no longer with us, had a pickup truck, and pickup trucks that's a whole nother social mark in the South, in our social mark rurally. But she had a pickup truck and it was new. I don't know where Snick got the money from, but there she was. And she used to take this pickup truck and drive from her place in Bolivar County, which is just north of me, to Holly Springs. And I would say to her, "Aren't you afraid to be on the road by yourself?" She said, "No, look under my chair." And she didn't have a gun, but she had a very big wrench. And she told me this time, she said, one time she picked up this young white boy. All of his teeth were gone, et cetera. And she asked him, "Well, where are you going?" He said, "Wherever you're going, I'm going." And she said, "Well, I'm headed up to Memphis." She said, "I'm heading up to Memphis right along with you." So in the course of the drive, she said to him, "Well, why are you leaving Mississippi?" He had just left Parchment. He said, "I'm getting out of this state. I'm getting out of this state any kind of way that I can." It didn't matter whether he was on parole or not, he was gone, because they had beaten him to a pulp in Parchment and he was done. You know, in the post, I'm going to take you on a little history lesson. In the post-Civil War period, when there was an effort to redeem this country, the issue of racism overpowered the efforts of Black people and white people to get together. And there was an active engagement of Black farmers and white farmers, because it was an agricultural base, as you know. The overpowering part of it had to do with the Klan and the call of racists. I don't know what, it must be a cohesion, because people would join the Klan whether they wanted to join the Klan or not, but they were in the Klan and they had the garb. And when the Klan leader said, "Let's do this," they were on the "let's do this." But the Klan, you don't know, the Klan got rebuffed in a lot of places. And one of my favorite places is in North Carolina, where the Lumbee Indians told the Klan to get the hell out. Just get the hell out. They all came together with their firearms and said, "You want to do something? Be ready to go down." And so I just want you to know that we have had histories of resistance. There were even communities that refused to go into the Civil War on the Confederate side, and they were in the Deep South. Now, it is true that they were overpowered in the post-Civil War period. Again, I'm talking about that cohesion that racism tends to bring among basically white people. But I want you to know that the resistance is there. I'm going to take a segue. Can I take a segue? Lucy's Children at one point used to be very, very active. Now we're trying to get up on at least 3 legs. We were down on 2 for a while. And one of the things we're going to talk about very soon is the Holocaust. And there are people who say, "Well, that's a big step." Not really, because Hitler studied racism in this country in order to know how to employ that in Europe. You didn't know that in many cases, you know. And the issue of what is going on now is a replay. It's from the playbook. If you read, you will see it as almost word for word, the takeover plans. And we have got to struggle against it, and we can't wait till they're at the door, because when they're at the door, it is what? Too late. Okay. Thank you. All right.
I have a little bit of the laryngitis, but Muriel, thank you so much for that heartrending reminiscences. I have so much floating around in your presentation when you invoke all the names of these iconic people: Bob Moses, Hella Baker, Stokely. What was it like, a young person, young woman, to be in that atmosphere? And if you could talk a little bit about the dynamics between all these iconic figures, and what a privilege we have to have you still here with us to really, talk about. Yes, and, you're still in your good mind, good humor, and still have ambition and want to share. Thank you.
Well, that's a multi-layered question. I will tell you, when we had a meeting, we used to look around and see who was still there because somebody was not going to be there. And we closed out meetings with this song, Will the Circle Be Unbroken? Because, some people left because they had had enough, and we had people who had various breakdowns of one kind or another. But I will tell you, we were so glad to see each other alive. It was just amazing. And when we were looking for Schwerner and Goodman and them, we were looking all over. At that point, it didn't matter, and they weren't the only ones who died that summer. When they were looking for those three, they dredged some of the rivers, and they pulled up so many bodies that they could not believe it. They could not believe it. There were hundreds of bodies, primarily of young Black men who had been swiped, kidnapped, murdered, etc. And the river was where so many of them disappeared, because the river doesn't tell a story till you dredge it. The bottom line is we were all equals. Everybody who was there carried his own weight. And you just hope that people paid attention to the tactical supports that we had. I used to drive around with a guy, I used to think he was kind of simple-minded, actually. He would drive and he was all lackadaisical and stuff. And one day we were coming up to a police barricade. Now the police and the Klan were about the same. It was only the matter of the uniform. And I saw these guys up ahead, and I said to this person that I hesitated to use his name because I think he's still alive and I don't want to cause any pressure on him. And I said to him, okay, what are we going to do? He said, look under my seat and look under your seat. If push comes to shove, you know. And I said, well, because that was the decision you made. You weren't going to go easy. You weren't going to go easy. I've often wondered what happened to the three who were turned out by the sheriff, because the story has never been told true, because they knew. That was one of the tactical lessons that we learned in Ohio. Never, ever let them let you go at night, period. If you got to turn around and smack the sheriff to make him put you back in jail, do that, because that's going to be less of a problem than going out the front door. And I would just say to you, every day was a blessing. And just like when I told you about the guys in the corner who were drinking, once you've been to war and come back, you're a different person. You're just different. And people who haven't gone to war with you don't know. They don't know. Any other questions or comments?
We have two questions on Zoom. We have Lajira, then Kim.
I gotta blow my nose. Somebody saying something?
Not yet. Go ahead, Lajira.
Oh, you can hear that?
You should be able to unmute. Pat, would you unmute? There we go.
You're
Go for it,
unmute.
Lajira.
I thank you muchly. First of all, thank you, Muriel. I've heard it before. I needed to hear it again. And there is a line I stole from your presentation to use next week in my presentation. Yes, come back, people. We're doing another one on words and action. The thing I guess I want to say the most is that you touched on a lot of things that like music and the emotions, and I think that's one of the things that's most important. And I do thank you muchly for all of this. And we will probably talk next week.
Thank you, Lajara. We have Kim.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say thank you so much. Wow, what a powerful talk. I held on to every word. What I want to thank you for is Lucy's children and getting to know you. I just felt it was so beautiful, Muriel, to walk in your shadow. You are so generous with your information. And I don't know how people here who may not know you, that you are a historian. And so you have taught so much. I've learned so much from you, from how whiteness even got started and how the rich use the term whiteness to sort the poor to break out power. So whiteness isn't even a concept that came with the country. But I'll say this other thing. I didn't even know until I met you that there were Black Indians that had nothing to do with slavery. They were here before slavery. And it's just, I could just go on and on and on and on about what you taught me. And if you didn't teach it, you brought in an expert to teach it. So I just think that the power, you're still doing the work. All I want to say is you're still doing the work with a new generation of people, and I appreciate you so much. You just don't know. And I'll pass.
Well,
Thank you, Kim.
Thank
We're
you.
going to have TJ and then Laura, and I think we're going to stop. Go ahead, TJ.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Muriel. I really felt and appreciate your real history telling. I wanted to ask you, could you recommend 2 books for young people that they could just something to give them some information in light of where we are today?
I don't think I can come up with a book quite like that. When you say for young people, sort of qualifies it, because
Well, for people, don't not necessarily for okay, for people,
uh,
for especially to discuss organizing or to give an insight into organizing at the level that the Southern, the SNCC did, the how, like, what was the basis, the foundation that they followed, or that was it recorded? I would be curious.
I'm going to have to dodge that question because I don't really have a particular source to point you to. The SNCC history has been so fractured because of the way that we broke up. You know,
Yeah.
COINTELPRO did its job, and some people are just coming back together. There is a SNCC website
Hmm.
that you can go onto and
Okay.
you can look up some information. You can tap me, and there are a couple of others of us that are still around. We've lost a lot of people. We lost a
Yeah.
lot of people in the 60s, and we've lost a lot of people since, actually. Um, I try to tell people that it's hard to know now what we were looking at then, but there's a book by a girl that I used to know, Ann Moody, who wrote Coming of Age in Mississippi, which will put your feet flat on the ground,
Okay.
really understand what we were looking at. Because when I said that we were coming into a police state, I try to tell people, if you were a Jew and you were in Berlin, and this was 1939, you are beginning to get the message of what the horror and the terror was. One false move, one false look at the eye, etc. You were there by the grace of God. Frankly, you were alive by the grace of God. And I thank the people of Mississippi because they're some good people. They're some really good people. And when I hear elected officials says, well, I can't do that because, my livelihood, etc. And I want to know, come on. What kind of man are you? Or what kind of woman are you? When people have put themselves out there, when I read about the people who are righteous among nations, the people who in the middle of a horror said to Jews, as few or as many as they could, I have a harbor of safety for you. I'm willing to put myself on the line for you. That's bravery that is just beyond words, you know, and we have to be a brave nation because we are facing some very, very serious situations, and they will impact us for at least a generation. So you cannot escape it. There's some people say, well, I'm not political. That just means the politics has you. That just means that you're already tied up. And you're going to have to get untied. Anything else? Oh, I have to tell you this one thing, because this is part of what I was talking about. We went to war. I got a call one night, one of our people was missing. That's just one call, but I'll tell you about this one call. And this was at a place called Hollandale. Now, you never saw Hollandale. Hollandale is about as big as this microphone, okay? But every step of it was evil except for the black people. And some of them were just plain scared. And one of our people was present there. There is nothing alike trying to find your person in the middle of the night with the hounds barking because they're coming. And you're trying to find your person ahead of the hounds, because behind the hounds come the guns and come the guys who are going to kill him. There's no question about we're going to talk to you, you know, like your mother. I told you not to do so. No, that past that. And that changes you. And you grow up and you understand that childhood is a door you have to close. And you have to become a man or a woman. And I will tell you, people who were my friends before I came to the movement, if they went in the movement, I closed that door. There's nothing I can do with you. I mean, we don't have to be hostile, but I'm on a new trajectory. And that trajectory took me around the world. And I saw all kinds of things, and I saw the efforts of people to shake off the mantles of oppression, of colonialism. You know, when they tell you the sun never shines on the kingdom, that tells you a lot of stories. You can look at the upside or you can look at the downside, but there's quite a side to look at. Thank you very much.